People talk about healing as if it's a destination, a sunny, peaceful shore you finally wash up on after a terrible storm. I wish it were that simple. For me, healing wasn't a place I arrived at. It was a journey, a grueling cross-country trek on foot, through deserts of numbness and forests of grief, over mountains of rage, and through valleys of self-doubt. There was no map, there was no compass. For a long time, there wasn't even a sun. There was just the next faltering step. In the dark. This is the story of how I learned to navigate that darkness, and how I finally found my own light again. The end of my relationship with Michael wasn't an event. There was no single dramatic fight, no slam door, no final tearful confession. It was a slow, quiet evaporation of self. The real end happened long before I finally packed my bags. The day I left was just the day I finally acknowledged the ghost I had become. The day I realized that the person he claimed to love didn't exist anymore, because he had systematically, lovingly, sanded her down to nothing. The first week after leaving him was spent in a state of profound and terrifying silence. I was staying in my sister's spare bedroom, a small, unfamiliar space with pale yellow walls and a floral comforter that seemed to mock my own colorless existence. It felt like a holding cell between my past and a future I couldn't begin to imagine. For 4 years, my life had been a constant state of high alert, a never-ending, exhausting effort to manage Michael's moods, to anticipate his needs, to navigate the labyrinth of his jealousy, to be the person he wanted and needed me to be. His presence, even in its most oppressive form, had been the background noise of my entire adult life. Now there was just silence, and in that silence I felt nothing. It was the most terrifying feeling I've ever known. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even relieved. I was a blank slate, a hollowed out space. It felt as though he had taken all the furniture of my personality with him when he left, and I was left rattling around inside an empty room. My own mind was a stranger's house that my sister would come to the door and gently ask if I wanted to eat. I would nod and eat whatever she put in front of me without tasting it. Food was just fuel to keep the machine running. Friends would call, their voices laced with a concerned pity I didn't know how to respond to. They wanted to know what happened, but how could I explain a slow poisoning? How could I articulate a death by 1,000 paper cuts, 1,000 subtle dismissals, 1,000 jokes that weren't really jokes? There was no single dramatic story of abuse to tell. There was just the quiet, insidious story of my own disappearance. So I would give them monosyllabic answers, unable to access the part of myself that knew how to have a conversation. The effort was too great. Sleep was my only refuge from the crushing weight of my own emptiness. But even that was a battlefield. I had nightmares, not about him hitting me or yelling at me, but about looking in a mirror and having no reflection. I would stand there in the dream and see only the blank wall behind me. I would wake up with my heart pounding, drenched in a cold sweat. The feeling of my own nothingness so profound it felt like I was suffocating in the quiet, floral-scented bedroom. This, I learned later, is the first stage of healing from a toxic relationship. It's not about grief for the person you lost. It's about the profound, disorienting shock of confronting the person you've become, a stranger to yourself. Before I could even think about rebuilding my life, I had to walk through the ruins of my own identity and take an inventory of what, if anything, was left. And in those first few weeks, the answer felt like nothing at all. The room was empty. The numbness, like a morphine drip, eventually began to wear off. It did not reveal peace. It revealed a confusing, chaotic storm of emotion. One moment, I would be seized by a wave of intense, inexplicable grief for him, for the charming, brilliant, wonderful man he had been in the beginning. Our first few months had been a fairy tale. I would remember the way he used to make me laugh until I couldn't breathe, the way he looked at me across a crowded room as if I were the only person there. I would scroll through old photos on my phone, a form of self-torture, and see our smiling faces, a happy couple frozen in time. In those moments, I would be consumed by a longing so sharp it felt like a physical pain. My treacherous mind would whisper to me, maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe you overreacted. Maybe you were too sensitive. Maybe you could have fixed it. This is the siren song of a toxic relationship. Your mind, desperate for comfort and terrified of the unknown future, tries to pull you back to the familiar shore of the good times. It conveniently edits out the reality that that shore was surrounded by jagged rocks and treacherous currents. I would have to physically shake my head, forcing myself to remember the other moments, the subtle insults about my intelligence that were disguised as jokes, the quiet, heavy disapproval when I wanted to see my friends without him, the way my stomach would clench with a cold, anxious knot every single time I heard his keys in the door, my mind instantly scanning the day for anything I might have done wrong. Then, just as quickly as the grief came, it would be replaced by a white-hot, blinding rage. I was angry at him, of course. Angry for what he had done, for his subtle, insidious campaign of dismantling my confidence and isolating me from my life. But the anger that scared me the most was the anger I felt at myself. This was the hardest part of the inventory, confronting my own perceived complicity. Why had I stayed for so long? Why did I ignore the red flags that now seemed as bright and obvious as carnival lights? Why did I accept his flimsy excuses? Why did I make myself so small to accommodate the vast, needy space of his ego? The questions were a merciless interrogation. With no good answers, I bought a journal. I didn't know what else to do with the storm inside my head. I started to write. I filled pages and pages, not with elegant prose, but with raw, ugly, furious scribbling. I wrote down every incident I could remember, every time I had felt that quiet, uneasy feeling in my gut and had chosen to ignore it in favor of keeping the peace. The journal became a painful but necessary archive of my own slow erasure. Reading it back was like watching a horror movie where I was the main character, and I was screaming at the screen, "Don't go in there. Can't you see he's the killer?" It was through that painful process of writing that I came to a devastating realization. My sense of self had been completely outsourced. For 4 years, my worth had been determined by his mood. If he was happy with me, I was a good person, worthy of love. If he was displeased, I was flawed, difficult, too sensitive. My emotions were not my own. They were a reaction to his. I didn't know what music I liked anymore because I had only ever listened to his playlists. I didn't know what I thought about politics because my opinions had been subtly molded to align with his. One Saturday, my sister, in a desperate attempt to get me out of the house, asked me a simple question. "What do you want to do today, Lila? Anything at all?" "Your choice." I stared at her blankly. The question felt like an impossible existential exam. What do I want to do? The concept was so foreign I couldn't grasp it. My entire being had been oriented around anticipating and meeting the wants of another person for so long that my own had simply atrophied from disuse. After a long, painful silence, I just burst into tears. "I don't know," I sobbed, the words ripped from the hollowest part of me. I honestly have no idea. That was my rock bottom. Not the day I left him, but the day I realized I no longer had a map for my own life, that I had forgotten how to read the compass of my own heart. The inventory was complete. The room wasn't just empty. I had forgotten how to furnish it. Healing is not a passive process. It doesn't just happen to you with the passage of time. It is active. It is work. It is showing up for yourself day after day, especially on the days you don't want to. And it is the hardest, most grueling, and most important work I have ever done. My journey back to myself began with a single terrifying step. I made an appointment with a therapist. Walking into that office for the first time felt like a monumental act of surrender. I had spent my life trying to be strong, to handle things myself. Asking for help felt like an admission of failure. But my therapist, a kind, wise woman named Dr. Anya, showed me that true strength wasn't about enduring pain alone. It was about having the courage to ask for a guide to help you find your way out of the darkness. In our sessions, in the safety of that quiet, gentle room, I finally found the language for my experience. I learned about gaslighting, about love bombing, about coercive control, about trauma bonding. These weren't just psychological buzzwords. They were the names of the invisible bars that had made up my cage. Naming them took away their shadowy power. It shifted the narrative. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was a rational person who had been subjected to a systematic and insidious campaign of manipulation. Dr. Anya validated my reality, and in doing so, she gave me back the first, most essential piece of myself, the belief in my own perception. The next phase of my work was about rediscovery. Dr. Anya gave me a simple assignment: start dating myself. The goal was to relearn my own tastes, my own desires, my own company, one small experiment at a time. It felt absurd and self-indulgent at first. I started small. I would go to a coffee shop alone, order 3 different pastries, and figure out which one I actually liked the best without the influence of what someone else wanted. It seems trivial, but it was revolutionary. From there, I moved on to bigger things. I went to the movies by myself, sitting in the middle of the theater with a giant popcorn that was all for me. I went to an art museum and spent 3 hours in a single gallery dedicated to abstract expressionism, just because I wanted to, without anyone sighing impatiently behind me. I had loved hiking before I met Michael, but he had always found it boring and dirty. One crisp autumn morning, I found my old hiking boots in the back of my closet, drove to a state park, and started walking. As I climbed the trail, my lungs burning, my legs aching, I felt a sense of power and capability I hadn't felt in years. When I reached the summit and looked out at the sprawling valley below, the wind whipping through my hair, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had gotten myself here. My own 2 feet, my own strength, had carried me to this beautiful place. I didn't need anyone else to lead the way. The hardest work was rebuilding my social circle. I had to make a lot of painful, apologetic phone calls to the friends I had let drift away, the ones I had ghosted during my relationship because it was easier than facing Michael's disapproval. I had to explain that my distance wasn't about them. It was about the isolation that had been imposed on me. To my everlasting gratitude, my true friends understood. They welcomed me back with open arms and without judgment. They helped me remember what real, healthy, unconditional love felt like. They helped me remember the sound of my own laugh. There were setbacks, of course. Healing is not a straight line up a mountain. It's a messy spiral. There were days when a song on the radio would send me into a spiral of grief. There were nights when I was so lonely, the silence in my apartment felt like a physical weight. But now, I had tools. I had my journal. I had my therapist. I had my friends. I was slowly, painstakingly building a new foundation, one that was mine and mine alone. It's been 5 years since I left Michael. The work of healing is never truly finished, but the landscape of my life is unrecognizable from the barren wasteland it once was. My small apartment is no longer an empty room. It's a sanctuary filled with books I love, art that inspires me, and the comfortable, happy clutter of a life being fully lived. The biggest change is internal. The constant low-grade anxiety that was my ever-present companion for years is gone. It has been replaced by a quiet confidence. I still have moments of self-doubt, but now I have a new voice in my head, my own. It's a voice that is kind, compassionate, and fiercely protective of my peace. I have started dating again, cautiously, but with a new set of eyes. My past experience is not baggage. It's a highly effective, non-negotiable filtration system. I am no longer dazzled by grand gestures or intense declarations. I am drawn to quiet kindness, to consistency, to men who ask for my opinion and genuinely want to hear the answer. I am no longer looking for someone to complete me. I am looking for someone to complement the whole happy life I have already built for myself. Last month, I was cleaning out my closet and I found it, the journal I had started in those first dark weeks after I left. I sat down on the floor and read it. I read the words of the confused, angry, hollowed-out woman I had been. I felt a wave of immense compassion for her pain and her loneliness. And then I closed the journal. I didn't throw it away. It's a part of my story, but I put it in a box on the highest shelf of my closet. Its place is in the archive of my past, not the active files of my present. My journey of healing wasn't about finding a new love or erasing the old one. It was about a quiet, deliberate, and sometimes painful process of repatriation, of returning to myself. It was about learning that I am my own sanctuary, my own safe harbor. The relationship didn't just teach me what I don't want in a partner. It taught me what I must have for myself: respect, autonomy, and a voice that I will never, ever allow to be silenced again. The sun has risen on my new life, and this time I am the one who controls the dawn. The years following my escape from the life I had with Michael were about repatriation. It was the slow, quiet, and deliberate process of returning to the native country of myself. I learned my own geography again, the mountains of my resilience, the rivers of my creativity, the quiet valleys where I could find peace. I rebuilt my life not as a fortress against the world, but as a sanctuary for myself. I was happy in my solitude. It was a clean, well-lit space, and I had no desire to let anyone else in to clutter it up. I certainly wasn't looking for love. I didn't think I was capable of that kind of trust anymore. And then I met Sam. It happened in the most mundane way possible at a friend's backyard barbecue. He wasn't a flashy, charismatic man who dominated the room like Michael had. He was a civil engineer, a man who designed bridges, and he had a quiet, steady presence that felt solid. He asked me about the book I was reading, and he actually listened to my answer. He had a kind smile and a laugh that was gentle, not demanding. There were no fireworks, no intense, soul-searing stares. He just felt comfortable, safe. That safety was both alluring and, to my trauma-conditioned mind, deeply suspicious. He asked me out for coffee the next week. I almost said no. The thought of voluntarily entering that arena again, of opening myself up to the possibility of that kind of pain, was terrifying. But a small, hopeful part of me, the part that had survived the fire, whispered, "It's just coffee." So I went. Our relationship grew like a nervous seedling. It was a slow, cautious process, mostly on my part. Sam was endlessly patient. He seemed to instinctively understand that I was a creature that had been wounded, and he never pushed. He never love-bombed me with grand gestures or constant, suffocating texts. He learned my boundaries and treated them with a respect that felt foreign and beautiful. When I needed a night to myself, he would simply say, "Okay, enjoy your peace. Talk to you tomorrow." And there was no punishment, no guilt trip, no cold silence the next day. He just meant it. For a year, I lived a double life. On the outside, I was in a budding, healthy relationship. On the inside, I was a hyper-vigilant analyst, constantly scanning his behavior for red flags. Every kind gesture was put under a microscope. When he offered to help me fix a leaky faucet, the voice of my trauma whispered, "He's trying to create dependency to show you that you need him." When he asked about my friends, it whispered, "He's gathering intelligence to isolate you later." It was exhausting, living with that constant, low-level hum of suspicion. But every single time, Sam's actions proved to be nothing more than what they were: genuine, simple, and kind. He wasn't trying to build a cage. He was just helping me build a life. Slowly, agonizingly, I began to trust him. The hypervigilance started to fade, replaced by a feeling I hadn't felt in a very long time, a sense of calm partnership. We decided to move in together, a step that terrified me but also felt right. We found a small house with a big yard where I could plant the garden I'd always wanted. This love was not a storm. It was a quiet, sunlit harbor, and I was finally learning how to drop my anchor. I thought I was healed. I thought the ghosts of my past had been laid to rest, but trauma is never truly gone. It's just dormant, waiting for the right frequency to awaken it. The trigger came on a Tuesday evening. Sam, who had been working incredibly hard at his firm for years, came home with a look of pure, unadulterated excitement on his face. "You are not going to believe this," he said, grabbing me and spinning me around. They offered me the lead on the Bay Bridge expansion project. It's a huge promotion, Lila, the biggest of my career. I felt a surge of genuine happiness for him. "Sam, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you." "There's a catch," he said, his smile still wide. "It's a 2-year project. It's going to mean a lot of long hours and probably 2 or 3 nights of travel a week to the site offices up north. It's going to be grueling, but after this, it sets us up for life." And there I was. A few innocent words, long hours, travel, a demanding career, and the ghost that had been sleeping peacefully inside me shot up, screaming. The room suddenly felt cold. My breath caught in my chest. The smiling, happy man in front of me flickered, and for a terrifying second, I saw Michael. I saw the excuses, the absences, the beginning of the long, slow fade. In my mind, a catastrophic chain reaction began. Long hours mean less time for me. Travel means nights alone. A demanding career means my needs will come second. This is how it starts. This is the beginning of the end. My smile faltered. "Oh," I said, my voice small. "That's a lot of travel." Sam's ecstatic expression immediately softened with concern. "I know, but we'll make it work. We'll have the weekends. And it's only for a couple of years." "It's for us, the same phrase Michael had used. My blood ran cold. Over the next few weeks, I became a different person. The calm, confident woman I had worked so hard to become was replaced by a frightened, anxious ghost. I was on edge constantly. If Sam came home late from work, my mind would immediately leap to the worst conclusions. If he didn't text back within an hour, a familiar sick panic would churn in my stomach. I started asking more questions than usual. Who was at the meeting? What did you talk about? When exactly will you be home? I hated myself for it. I could hear how my questions sounded needy, suspicious, controlling. I was acting like him, but I couldn't stop it. The trauma had been triggered, and it was now at the controls, steering me into a spiral of fear. Sam, being Sam, noticed. Became quiet, cautious around me. I could see the confusion and hurt in his eyes. My anxiety was creating a chasm between us. The ghost of my past was poisoning my present. I knew I was on the verge of sabotaging the best thing that had ever happened to me. One night, after a particularly tense dinner where I had been peppering him with questions about an upcoming business trip, he put his fork down and looked at Me, his expression full of a gentle sadness. "Lila," he said softly, "what's going on? You seem so far away lately. Ever since I told you about the promotion, did I do something wrong?" And looking at his honest, open, worried face, I knew I had a choice. I could continue to let this fear drive a wedge between us, to let my past win, or I could take the most terrifying step of all. I could make myself completely, utterly vulnerable. I took a deep breath. "No, Sam," I said, tears welling in my eyes. "You haven't done anything wrong. You have been perfect. The problem isn't you. It's me. It's my past. Can I please tell you about it? The whole story." We sat on the couch for the next 2 hours, and I told him everything. I didn't just summarize. I gave him the ugly, painful details. I told him about Michael, about the gaslighting, the isolation, the way his career was used as an excuse to diminish me. I explained why the words long hours and travel were not just words to me, but triggers that unlocked a deep primal fear of being abandoned and erased again. I laid the ghost bare, letting it fill the space between us. I was terrified. He would see me as broken, as too much work. When I finished, I was crying silently. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just held my hand. Then he looked at me, and his eyes were full of an empathy so profound it took my breath away. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for trusting me with that, for letting me see the whole picture. I can't even imagine how strong you are." He paused, choosing his words with care. "Your fear makes perfect sense. It's not an overreaction, it's a scar. And it's not your problem to deal with alone anymore. It's ours." Ours, the word that had once been a trap now felt like a lifeline. "So, what do we do?" he asked, looking at me like a true partner. "This job is important, but you are more important. How do we make a new map for this, one that makes you feel safe?" And so we did. Together, we built a plan. It wasn't about him giving up his dream, and it wasn't about me suffering in silence. It was about communication and transparency. He volunteered to share his work calendar with me, not so I could track him, but so I would never be surprised. We scheduled a 10-minute goodnight video call for every single night he was away, a non-negotiable anchor in our day. We came up with a code word I could text him if I was having a bad echo day, so he would know I needed a little extra reassurance. No questions asked, it wasn't easy. There were still days when the old fear would whisper in my ear. But now, instead of letting it spiral in silence, I would say to him, "I'm feeling that echo today." And he would simply say, "I know, I'm here, you're safe." The project started, he traveled, he worked long hours, but the fear was gone. It had been replaced by a deep, resilient trust, a trust that was stronger than before because it had been tested by the ghosts of my past and had survived. One evening, about a year into his project, I was out in the garden we had built together, weeding the rose bush. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over everything. Sam came home and walked out into the garden to find me. He didn't say anything. He just wrapped his arms around me from behind, and we stood there together, watching the last rays of sun disappear. In that quiet moment, I felt a sense of profound peace. My healing journey hadn't been about learning to be whole on my own. I had already done that. This final, most important chapter was about learning to be whole with someone else. It was about realizing that the right person doesn't just love the beautiful garden you've grown. They see the fire-scorched earth you started with, and they love you for the strength it took to plant anything at all. They see your scars, and instead of running from them, they offer you their hand and help you build a future where you never have to be afraid of the dark again.